As Kazuo Odachi climbed into the cockpit of a Zero fighter, he knew this was his last day on Earth. His plane, pockmarked with bullet holes from previous engagements, was destined to be his tomb. This is because Kazuo was a kamikaze pilot whose sole mission that day was to plow his aircraft and its 500-kilogram bomb tied underneath into an American ship. As the first plane in line lurched forward, Kazuo held the scarf his Taiwanese girlfriend had made for him. Inscribed on it was the motto, "One shot, one kill," and today he was finally going to fulfill that promise. However, just as Kazuo began gaining speed on his one-way ticket to the afterlife, a truck pulled onto the runway, bearing news that would change his life forever. Come along for the ride as we explore the story of the luckiest kamikaze pilot that ever lived. Born in a rural village outside Tokyo, Kazuo did not come from a military family. In fact, his family were like many who did not support what Imperial Japan was doing, but were powerless to do anything to stop them. Instead, his parents wanted him to do anything but join the military, so his parents were less than enthusiastic when he passed the grueling entrance exams for training as a naval aviator. In 1943, at the age of 16, Kazuo began his pilot training. Like all young, aspiring pilot trainees, he did not want to fly anything but the Zero, Japan's most infamous single-seat fighter aircraft. After months of training, which was ominously cut short, he and his fellow graduates were sent off to their first duty stations as fighter pilots. In the aftermath of what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot and the air raids over Truk, American forces crippled Japanese naval aviation. While Kazuo and his comrades knew that a lot of aircraft were lost and good pilots killed, they had no idea the true extent of the damage until after their transfer from Taiwan to the Philippines. It was here, on a dimly lit airfield that was formerly Clark Field, that Kazuo realized he would not survive the war. That night, as he and the other pilots were drinking and cracking jokes to pass the time, a high-ranking Japanese officer barged in on their fun. He ordered them to the Clark Field command post immediately. At such a late hour, this order was highly unusual, and Kazuo didn't know what to expect. The command post, little more than a canvas tarp on top of several bamboo poles, was bristling with high-ranking officers they had never seen before. A captain ordered the pilots to fall into ranks. As the men did so, they could barely see one another under the moonlight, but could tell one thing by the look on the officers' faces. The news was not good. After falling into ranks, the captain explained that the situation was grave and that Japan was running out of aircraft. The only way for Japan to win was for each remaining pilot to become one with his machine and smash it into an American ship if Japan had any hopes of winning the war. Kazuo could not believe what he was hearing. The Japanese High Command was seriously asking them to forego all the training and experience they had by sacrificing themselves. As he was still taking this in, the officer informed the group that due to the solemn nature of this duty, only volunteers would be accepted, and each willing aviator should raise their hand. But no one had a choice. They were expected to accept the mission that would result in their death. Another officer, more irate than the first, screamed at them that volunteers should raise their hands. A few men sheepishly raised their hands, and soon all the pilots, including Kazuo, had their hands in the air. The officers thanked them all for volunteering, and the next day, the first kamikaze mission left the Philippines to strike American ships. Why Kazuo was not selected to go on these first kamikaze missions, destined to stem the tide of MacArthur's advance into the Philippines, is unknown. Kazuo himself surmises that because of the chaos of the situation at the time, with new pilots arriving from all over the Pacific each day to sacrifice themselves, his name simply got lost in the shuffle. Nevertheless, Kazuo spent 4 long months in the Philippines, fighting American bombing raids and malaria before he and several dozen aviators were evacuated back to Taiwan in February 1945. Once back in Taiwan, Kazuo knew that his time was limited. After recovering their health sufficiently after spending months in the Philippine jungle, Kazuo and his fellow pilots waited for their names to be called up next. With his entire air group now designated as a Special Attack Task Force, it was only a matter of time before their number got called up. That day finally came on April 4, 1945. Unknown to Kazuo, the U.S. had just invaded Okinawa on April 1st. With more than 1,300 U.S. ships assembled, including around 40 aircraft carriers, Japan was doing all it could to destroy the U.S. at sea. This is where Kazuo and his comrades came in. During their time in Taiwan, they had received instruction on the best way to kill a carrier. According to their trainers, American aircraft carriers typically had 2 aircraft elevators forward and rear that would bring planes up from the lower decks. In an attack, kamikazes were expected to crash into each elevator to render them useless and destroy any aircraft that would be hidden below. If they did not find a carrier, the officers told them a battleship would do. In this case, they would aim for the smokestacks to send their bomb into an engine room and explode the ship from within. If a kamikaze could find neither of these targets, then any U.S. ship would suffice. And though this already sounds crazy enough, contrary to popular belief, the Japanese did at least want to give the kamikazes a fighting chance by providing fighter escorts on each mission. The purpose of these fighter escorts was twofold. Not only could they prevent American planes from shooting down the heavily laden Zeros before they reached their target, but they also confirmed battle damage and reported back to base. On this day, Kazuo and a comrade were being escorted by 2 Zeros. Their mission was to sink at least one of the 4 reported aircraft carriers between the island of Ishigaki and Okinawa. As Kazuo began taking off, he fought his Zero hard to get it off the ground. Because the Zero had not been intended to carry bombs, the ground crews had jerry-rigged a cable system attached to hooks on his wings to carry external fuel tanks. In the event of encountering enemy aircraft, they were expected to let loose their bombs and fight. Since carrying a 500-kilogram bomb basically made them an unmaneuverable target that said, "Shoot me." As Kazuo and his comrades took off, they flew low above the water surface to stay under the prying eyes of American radar. At just 30 feet off the water, one wrong move meant plunging into the ocean. But at that same time, they had to keep looking up to ensure American fighters didn't ambush them. It was not easy, to say the least. As they searched in vain for the carriers, they spotted several black dots on the horizon. Was this it? Had they finally found their mark? As the group continued to get closer, they saw the black dots begin to rise and gain altitude. These were not ships, but a similar group of 4 Hellcats coming right at them. At that moment, Kazuo looked over at his wingman, and they both nodded in silent agreement to drop their bombs. With the push of a button, they released them, and they both exploded on the water surface. If the Americans hadn't seen them before, they certainly had now. In training, they had been taught that because of a Hellcat's superiority in firepower and maneuverability, the Zero had one real chance to shoot one down. When closing with one, the Japanese pilot should think they were going to cut the belly open of the Hellcat with their propeller. When the American pilot inevitably turned away to avoid a collision, the Japanese pilot would use that brief moment to shoot directly into their foe. On this day, Kazuo knew that this was what he was going to do. As he singled out a Hellcat from the formation, he flew straight towards it, not changing his course one bit. Just as expected, the Hellcat maneuvered to get out of the way and he fired. But the American was too quick. Not only had he avoided being shot, but he was now directly behind Kazuo, chasing him. Over the next several minutes, Kazuo and the American fought a dogfight, where Kazuo was on his back foot. Trying desperately to get away, Kazuo doesn't even remember exactly how he shook his foe, only that in about 5 minutes he was entirely alone. Running low on fuel, Kazuo decided to head back to base. Upon his arrival, he was happy to find out that each of his comrades also had made it back. They would not be so lucky next time. Several weeks later, Kazuo's name came up again for an attack after a downed American airman had a map detailing U.S. ship locations. Kazuo, along with 3 other kamikazes and 3 escorts, went up in search of the American force. Not soon after takeoff, one of the kamikazes experienced engine trouble and had to return to base. About 15 minutes later, the flight leader, who was also the lead kamikaze, began to experience engine trouble too. This time, the Zero's engine completely cut out, and the plane dropped rapidly. The pilot tried frantically to restart the engine, but with just 30 feet to fall, it soon slipped into the ocean without as much as a splash. Now, with just one other kamikaze and their escorts, they continued to search for the Americans when they spotted something odd. Sticking out of the water, as clear as day, was the periscope of an American submarine. Kazuo's surviving comrade radioed to him and said that they should take this target, but Kazuo refused. They were looking for aircraft carriers, and if they were going to die, they would do so by causing the most damage possible. Seeing the approaching Zeros, the submarine dived immediately. Although Kazuo had found an American sub, they did not locate any other U.S. vessels and returned to base to file a target not found report. His reprieve would be short-lived. On May 4, 1945, with the Battle of Okinawa clearly not going well for the Japanese High Command ordered a massive kamikaze strike. For Kazuo and his comrades, this meant sending out 21 kamikazes and just 5 escorts to search for and destroy an American carrier. This attack was divided into 3 groups, and Kazuo was part of the second wave, where he and 4 other kamikazes took off on what was supposed to be their final mission. However, after searching for hours in vain for the American fleet, they could find no targets and began heading back to base. That's when they got word that another group was successful. According to their fighter escort, another group scored 4 hits on an American carrier. But to Kazuo, this was nothing to celebrate. Those men were some of his closest friends, and knowing that they were gone hurt him deeply. Upon landing, he and the other survivors burned traditional incense in their on-base shrine and had a toast of sake in their fallen comrades' honor. After the May 4th attack, Kazuo was again on standby until his name came up again for a raid on May 18th. However, the weather turned poor soon after takeoff, and they all returned to base. Over the next few months, others flew to their deaths, with many never returning. Each day was like a wake, where the men would drink and tried to cajole one another that tomorrow would be their last day. However, the fun and games always ended around 9 o'clock each night when an officer would come into their quarters and tell them who was going out the next day. From then on, the men would stare silently, sipping their wine, until someone said it was time to go to bed. The next morning, those not selected to fly that day bid the kamikazes farewell and good luck on their mission. Kazuo remembers that they outwardly showed that they were happy, but deep down, none of them wanted to die. The happiness was due more so to the fact that this hell was finally over for them. But for Kazuo, he would be stuck in a sort of purgatory until orders came down in June that kamikaze raids would temporarily cease. This coincided with the Japanese defeat at Okinawa. For the next few months, life actually seemed normal. His superiors let men off base to spend time out in town. All of them were young men no older than 20. They spent their time drinking, eating, and chasing local women to their heart's content each night, knowing that today could be their last day. After 2 months of this, the order was finally rescinded, and in a change of heart, the Japanese High Command ordered an all-out kamikaze attack with every available plane in Taiwan. The mission aimed to strike any U.S. ship in and around Okinawa. The date was set for August 13, 1945, but as luck would have it, foul weather scrapped the mission at the last second. It was then rescheduled for August 15, 1945. With perfectly clear skies that morning, Kazuo knew this was it. As a symptom of how bad the war was going for Japan at this point, they could only find 30 airworthy Zeros in all of Taiwan to be flown off an airfield covered in bomb craters. Nevertheless, Kazuo's nightmare would finally come to an end, but not in the way he thought. As the lead aircraft began increasing speed, the next one followed. Kazuo, third in line, began increasing his throttle to use the entire 3,000 feet of runway to take off. As he started to gain speed, he felt the scarf his girlfriend had given him. He thought of his family back in Japan and how devastated they would be upon hearing of his death. At the same time, Kazuo thought of all of his friends who had died before him and how he would soon meet them once again in paradise. But that is not how Kazuo's story ends. Just as they were gaining speed, a truck began speeding out into the runway. Sitting in the back was a man frantically waving his arms and screaming something, but the din of 30 Zero engines made it impossible to make out what he was saying. In an incredible feat, the truck drove straight in front of the lead Zero to stop it, with the flight leader stopping just inches from it. Kazuo turned off his machine and opened to the cockpit to hear what the man was saying. Although barely audible, he could make out that the man was shouting to abort the attack. Soon, everyone jumped out of their aircraft and huddled around one of the last working radios, where the men heard the distinctive voice of the Emperor proclaiming Japan had surrendered. After the surrender, Kazuo and his men were forced to hand over their planes to General Chiang Kai-shek before being repatriated to Japan. Back home, Kazuo spent 36 years working with the police, finishing his career as a commander. He also continued his practice of kendo to become a certified master in the discipline. However, he kept silent about his wartime experiences for almost 70 years. Why he came forward as an old man was to tell the multifaceted and complicated reasoning of the kamikazes. He wants future generations to understand what was going through their minds, as one of the few men who survived to speak for the thousands of others who no longer had a voice. Not only is his story a testament to the men who died, but it's also an astounding tale of survival that demonstrates that Kazuo was the luckiest kamikaze pilot in recorded World War II history. Want to know more about what it was like to be one of the unfortunate soldiers who returned in disgrace? Check out What If Kamikaze Pilot Survived, or watch this video instead.